Okay, so we're going to start with part two of my interview with Rory Miller. Basically, the theme of this is the uncomfortable truths of self defense. Now, I went over last time Rory's background. Understand, he was a corrections sergeant, ran CERT teams, trained extensively, and applied that knowledge on a daily basis for many years. Under those conditions, he learned a hell of a lot. And in the first part of the episode, if you haven't seen it, you should watch it. We kind of laid out some of the ideas of self-defense and what's what and what you have to consider. This part, we talk about a variety of things, the difference between training, military and law enforcement and civilians, how in self-defense instructors have to be careful about how they position themselves. And this is extremely valuable information for anybody that is seeking out training. Um, to, you know, some of the warning signs that we discuss about, instructors that you may not, get a lot out of are covered in here. And then most importantly, I think, is the idea of training women at this. So, towards the end of this, there's some really, really good stuff about, the difference in training women and the whole idea between understanding the difference between fighting and hunting and how you train people. So again, these are uncomfortable truths. It is not the way we would like things, but as you can see in Rory's, quote here, if you deny reality, you can't control reality. And so let's take part two here and delve more into the uncomfortable realities of self-defense. Man, that's the reality of getting older, man. You start to realize that the mind's still there and your body's just going, dude, are you kidding me? That was 10 years ago. But when you when you put this out, when you train, when you train, like when you're training corrections and you were training your corrections team, how much of that applied to, is there, when you train a civilian class, a class of civilians on there, how much of it was, the same? How much did you have to alter? Did you alter, or did you take this exact same approach? Other than obviously people that aren't doing the job, you don't have to do some of the, scenario-based training that you would do for law enforcement, and you don't have the, force continuum that you have to really address there. But other than that, as far as the methodologies, were they pretty similar?
Really similar. But our methodologies, we had to change them. So this is the story behind everything. We had our administration make what, in my opinion, were some really, really bad decisions, and our officer or assaults on officers just shot way up. So in 1 year, we had, I believe, a third of our deputies attacked and 10% hospitalized in 1 year. Jose was running the training department at the time, and no one else seemed to care. It was when I sent a memo up the chain of command, our official, you need to look at this memo. And the only answer I got back was we all got ordered to quit counting officer assaults. It's just a fucked up bureaucracy. And Jose was the only one that seemed to care. And so he had a criteria. He wanted people with extensive martial arts experience, some experience teaching, and with at least 100 uses of force without a sustained internal affairs complaint. So he wanted people that knew how to handle themselves. And so Mac and I were kind of put on point with that. And the criteria was he wanted something that would work for all the officers, that would cover our entire use of force, everything from semi-compliant handcuffing up to people trying to kill you or getting caught in a riot. Regardless of whether the officer was new, old, young, weak, small, big, and we would have 18 hours. 16 hours, 2 days to get them ready for this. And so what the real back engineering we thought was not on the techniques, it was on the training methods. And so we went to, I was calling it principles-based, Mac was calling it awareness-based. Looking back on it now, the really powerful thing was it was play-based. So we came up with a safe way for them to go force on force, and we'd have them just start basically a fight. It's not a real fight because you aren't scared and you aren't getting injured. Right. and look at their natural movement, what they like to do. And then we take them out and work on a piece, and we throw them back in, and take them out and work on a piece and throw them back in, take them out and work on a piece and throw them back in. And the injury rate dropped by nearly a third. No, no increase in inmate injuries or excessive force complaints. It turned out to be a really effective. We were getting people in, and we started doing this with rookies. And in 2 days, we were getting people in a significantly better ability to handle themselves than 8 weeks at the academy, or in some cases in martial arts. I'm working with civilians now. I get a class in a seminar, and there'll be some people that have been studying for 20 or 30 years, and some people that this is their first class ever, and you can't tell them apart at the end of the weekend.
That's great.
It's that play-based is incredibly powerful.
Did the reason that you had the prior to you guys redoing everything, was the decisions made? Did it put the officer in a position where the inmates felt they could challenge more quickly, or there was some sort of a restraint that they picked up on, and that's why the things increased? Or was it just a training issue?
No, it wasn't a training issue. It was we were direct supervision, which means the officer is locked in the main room with the inmates. In our high security, they had cells, but our medium low security, there were no cells. It was an open dorm. We'd been really successful. We ran a really, really good jail because even in the high security, we gave them as much walk time and freedom. As that push the power down works for bad guys too. We gave them as much walk time and freedom as they could handle. We only took it away when it was directly involved with their behavior. And we were right there controlling it. They made the decision to, and also everyone had a cell, which meant that if they needed to cool off, we'd say, you know what, you need to go cool off. Just go to your cell, relax. I'll let you out when you're cooled down. They decided, and we also had a huge jump up in crime and violent crime. So our jurisdiction at the time, unless it was a violent person-to-person felony or it was a PV, you just got a ticket. You got summons to appear in court. So we had only violent people or people with prison history. Anyway, they decided to double bunk our maximum security. So now instead of one officer with 32 inmates, there's one officer with 60, and they were locked in their cells twice as much. So they basically turned into a pressure cooker. Yeah. And so when they came out, there were more inmates and they were more angry, and they didn't have the tools to help them control their tempers. So that was the administrative issue.
So they created basically a cauldron.
Yeah, pressure cooker. Yeah, the only way I can really imagine it. So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so double the bad guys, increase the stress on them. You're going to get more attacks.
The reason I think corrections is such an interesting group to work with is it truly is like it's just a petri dish for, like, you know, for all sorts of violence, you know, all different, you know, up to asocial, you know, where it's all in. And but then the other, the you know, you talk about the monkey dance in there, and there's a lot of it's really interesting, the difference between the two, you know, is the idea of the territorial use of violence. And I know with men, you know, I always talk, you know, to my classes, and I always tell them the difference is men, we have this really, it's more difficult for us than women to understand when it truly is the time to use, you know, violence and protect yourself, because we navigate, you know, communication with violence. We communicate with violence, and we have this monkey dance that can really confuse. You know, the worst things I've ever seen is when somebody confuses a monkey dance with a predator. And the results are just usually just horrific, because there's this idea that people have about violence, like a tit for tat.
Yeah.
And when you did a really good job of pointing out in there the difference, you know, species to species, there is this, because they want to preserve the species. And so that's the idea, you know, it's not to go right for kill. Whereas when it's interspecies, you know, when it's different species, the predatory, you know, uses of violence are very, very different. And that to me is really interesting in corrections, because just some of the things, like I talk to corrections officers, and I'm sure you know, the prisoners would know little things, like they could tell they knew what guard was coming up.
Yeah.
They memorized the sounds of his steps, how he sounded. They would even know things like there's one guard I talked to who was, well, actually he's a senior guy. Big dude, really, really, really big guy, bodybuilder, very proficient in a lot of things. But he said, yeah, he had one guy tell him one day, he goes, hey man, you got to change things up. And he goes, why? And he told him, he goes, listen, I know when you have leg day, because you take a step, you take a step and a half less, or more. It takes you a step and a half more to get up to this place. He goes, we counted off. He goes, and I know that. And he goes, believe me, everybody else in here, because they were planning for that one time where they were going to get it. He was in a pretty serious penitentiary. But I think what's interesting about that is, and you coming from that perspective, is you're very realistic about capabilities. You're very realistic about how people posture, and then also what a real threat is, and conveying that to people, I think, is really, really important. And when you first got into it, how long? It sounds like you probably had some good mentors originally that got you in there. How quick were you able to adjust to that mindset?
It was, all rookies come in a little paranoid, and it was one of those, my generation, everything I knew about or thought I knew about prisons was from Brew Baker and Cool Hand Luke.
Yeah. Right.
So it's like, I expected all the people I was working with to be super corrupt. I was expecting everyone to be an axe murderer. Everyone was a cold-blooded killer, any gang member. And it's, so partly because my expectation were up there, so was my awareness. I was paying attention to everything. But like rookies anywhere, I had no idea where the important things to pay attention to. And that was the big learning curve. It was one of the things I used to do with my rookies, commissary day. They'd order their stuff from the jail store. And I'd have them handed out and then go back into, because most of the places, not every place, like maximum security didn't have this, but our medium security had a place where you could go behind glass walls. You couldn't be seen, but you could see. And we'd go there and I'd point out who was paying off gambling debts, who was paying protection money with their candy, stuff like that. And that gave you a lot of dynamics that they would have tried to hide. So you'd learn to look at things like that. The reputation management we already talked about. One of the, and I hadn't thought about this until really recently because it's been so long ago. I'll say it was Wally, but one of my early training officers, there's a transport tank, and there are probably 20 to 30 inmates in there, and two of them are fighting and all the rest around there. And it's the old guy goes, you go in there and drag those fighters out. And it's like, what the? So I go into a enclosed cell with 30 inmates and grab two by the hair who were fighting and drag them out. And he goes, good. Can't go in there, fighting room, drag out two people who can't do this job. Of course, never fucking do it again. Call for backup next time. So, wow. Yeah. But that
trial by fire.
Yeah, well, it was just, I was tiny. He wanted to see if I had the guts to do it.
Right. No, and he probably did you a huge favor too, because had you failed, he probably could have got you. I mean, if somebody's not cut out for it,
yeah,
that's really important that both sides know that, that, and that your senior management knows that.
Yeah, and you want to find out early in your career before you get addicted to the security of a government job.
Yeah.
If you're going to hate every second of it, get out early.
What did it teach you, like dealing with the criminal class, dealing with guys that violence is part of their mode? Not all, and I think that's the other thing too. It's not everybody. There's very different types of criminals. I think everybody assumes, like you said, everybody is an axe murderer and they're just really proficient at this. There's all sorts of levels. But I guess what would be really interesting is, from any training that you had prior to becoming a corrections officer, martial arts training stuff, where did the reality start to come in, and what do you have anything in particular where there was something that just comes to mind?
Well, the reality wasn't bad. Most of the things that were hard were in my head. And I've written about it before, but my first actual fight in the jail, and I'd gone 6 months without a fight, which was I thought there was something wrong with me because it was a pretty hot. I was working either maximum security or booking, so I expect more, but talked a lot of stuff down. I didn't realize at the time is because I was so small that most of the social stuff was off the table because there's nothing to be gained. Um, so the first one, um, I had myself, I realized I was going to have to go hands on. I was challenged, and um, and so I had to make myself grab the guy because I had all this bullshit running around in my head. This is a stone cold killer. He's got a long history. He's been a criminal for a long time. I had never really worked out because I've been on the judo team at college. I've been playing with college level athletes for most of my adult life. This was a skinny kid who did too much crack. He didn't work out. He didn't eat right. And just grabbing him felt, I think I described it, I felt like he was made out of cheese.
Wow.
There was just nothing. I didn't realize. So it was, I had really solid, and, we talked about the sports. It's not the same as self-defense, but it's a really good way to get good. And when you're grappling, especially if you're grappling at a relatively high level in judo, it's great total body conditioning. You are pound for pound way stronger than anyone sees coming. And so that was the first couple. It's like the second one. I wrote in the book how you get these crystal clear thoughts that are stupid.
Mm-hmm. That was amazing, that part.
Okay, so it occurred to me that I've never carried handcuffs in a handcuff case before, so I should put them in my pocket because I'm not going to think to look in the case when I get this guy under control. So I put him in my pocket, and I tackled the dude, and because he's challenging an entire dorm. He's doing the whole "I'm Kung Fu master. I'm going to take you all on," and so I just sideswipe him from behind, body slam him, and I've got him down. I'm kneeling on his elbow and I'm kneeling on his back, and it's like I can't find my handcuffs. They aren't my handcuff case. Where the hell are they? Or it took me there. I don't know how long. I think someone else actually got there and cuffed him before I realized I put them in my pocket so I'd remember where they were, and absolutely forgot.
That's a really interesting point. The idea, because I had something similar happen to me one time where I made an adjustment, but I hadn't trained it. Mm-hmm. I didn't know, like I would imagine you probably didn't train to go to your pocket to get your hand. And I think that's the scary thing for people. I remember thinking I can't get to this piece of equipment, and it's because I had moved it. And I thought in the heat of it all, it would all come back to me, and it didn't. It actually, it really caused a problem because now you're doubting yourself. Now you're sitting there, what else isn't going to work?
Yeah. Well, and that's one of my fears when people are sure. It's like, if your instructor said, if you do this, it will break his collarbone, and you do it and it doesn't, how many students are going to have that in the back of their head? What else do you lie about? What else is wrong? What else? And they're going to freeze more. And that is why I do I don't know, usually this percentage of time, but if you wind up in that place where it's not working, just adapt, do something else. Keep moving.
Yeah. And the idea is, I think people misunderstand, like when, obviously my stuff's called target focused training, and like, these aren't magical places on the human body. They require work, and you have to understand the feedback loop, meaning you have to understand, what I'd like people to do is if you are successful, you understand what success looks like. Yeah. But if you don't get it, you better get into something else right away. Like that whole thing. This is not a one size fits all. And oftentimes people are surprised. Sometimes it doesn't make sense. I mean, it works really well in the big guy.
Yeah.
Like he goes down like a sack of potatoes, and then you got this little wiry dude that the same thing just didn't work. Not even close.
Crazy methed up pregnant woman.
I remember you reading that. Yeah.
There have been people shot in the head that kept fighting. So I have a hard time believing that anything's reliable.
Right.
And I'll take that. It's not reliable. Do it, but don't stop just because you think it's done. Keep moving.
That's where I'll see things like people doing disarms of a gun, and then putting, and their whole move is to pull the tool away and then point it back at the person like it's that solves everything. You know, oftentimes you don't know anything about the tool, you don't know anything about the weapon, and you still have an active brain. You still have a person who, if they're committed. I mean, I think a lot of times we train situations that make the instructor look good, or it's an assumed, or the worst thing anybody can ever tell me is, well, it works most of the time. You know, like, oh, that, or that you give them the one example where it didn't work, and which is all I need to know that, okay, that's not something you want to rely on. To me, it's amazing how much people will just put blind faith into these things, and putting hands on people for real. And the other thing people, I'd like you to touch on it too. The other thing that I always ask when people tell me, well, I did such and such and it didn't work, or this didn't work. My one question is, what was the intent? Like, what was the commitment level? Did you do it to save your life, or were you screwing around with your buddy or screwing around with your boyfriend, and you didn't really have the intent to hurt them or to really do it? How are you testing this knowledge? Because I think a lot of times people do things and they don't understand that, you know, what are the stakes? You know, if you have not truly dealt with somebody who is there to just rip through you and take you out because they want to get to wherever they want to go, it's very different from your friend that you're just kind of doing, you know, essentially a monkey dance with, and you don't really want to hurt each other.
Yeah, there's this whole, I don't know, just saying, I'm going to hiccup in a second. There's this whole map of levels of resistance, right? And when most people talk about full resistance, they're talking about sports resistance, right? And sports resistance, the guy's trying to win, but he's trying not to lose. So he tends to be kind of half-assed at both of those. Someone who goes all offensive can have advantage for a short amount of time as long as they don't overstep or the other guy's not ready for it. A guy who goes all defensive, it's really hard to make stuff work on, right? And this is stalling in judo. Stalling works. It works really well. But what I think as assaultive is the person's not defending themselves in any way. They aren't resisting anything they do. They're trying to beat you so badly and so quickly that you can't think of anything to do. And, you know, so they get close, and then and if you get hit 4 times before you realize you've been hit, and totally untrained people hit 4 times a second, you never close your OODA loop, and that's what they're counting on. You're just going to go down while you're figuring out what's going on. For training, one of the things that I sometimes have to talk about, and again, this applies mostly to wrist locks and stuff like that, which are joint locks are great for handcuffing. If the gift happens in the middle of a fight, you know, absolutely take it. But if you want one sure way to get your ass kicked, it's to go into fight trying to manufacture something.
Right.
If you've got a technique in your head and I'm going to make that technique work, you're too focused. You have to recognize the gifts. But sometimes you get a student, they'll learn something and then they go home and they try it on their boyfriend or whatever, and it didn't work. Well, when you're doing a specific thing to someone who knows exactly what's coming, then they can resist it directly. They don't have to worry about you, chopping them in the throat or any of the other things that you would do if it failed. So they're perfectly safe just to fuck with what you're doing. Yeah. And if you're using that as your standard for, I couldn't make it work, no one could. That's why all the instructors have those cheats. When someone, you're trying to just show something and then someone resists. So you give them that quick little kick in the chin to take their mind off of it and it works just fine.
Yeah.
If you aren't willing to do that, then everything will fail when you try it on someone who knows what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, the idea of, anybody can Monday morning quarterback if they know exactly what's about to happen. And there's too much of that, in the back and forth. I mean, when I train anything, like I won't, my big thing with people is them understanding that if I give them a set, technique, coordinate, I call it a coordination set. It has no reality in violence, has no reality in the real world. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get them to move their body in a different way that they would not choose to do on their own, because I'm trying to give them more options. I have no idea how it'll do, but what I have seen is when you take that approach, 2 things happen. One, people relax. They're not worried about getting the thing perfect. I tell everybody, hey, this is disposable. This is not to be memorized. This is just to learn, how your body moves. and do that. And then what's interesting is then when they go back into what we call free practice, when they're playing, then all of a sudden you see them do something they weren't doing before. Because why? You gave them a coordination movement, and they saw an opportunity to efficiently use that, and they could do it. But what's interesting to me is the disappointing reality that you point out very well in your book, is that untrained people who are just going for it oftentimes are just they do amazing things, and people and you point out in the book too that oftentimes trained people facing that are actually hindered by their training because it slows down their thinking process.
They're hindered by their expectation, the thing that we were talking about earlier. That's the I want to say that I'm talking out both sides of my mouth. I want everyone to train. I think training is good for you. I think it's good for your body. It's good for your brain. Good training, of course, is better than bad training. Okay. When you first start any martial art, you learn whole new ways to see. Every martial art sees the world and sees the other body in different ways. And so it's like when you first start grappling, it's like, oh my God, I did not know this was possible. This is all just a gift. When you learn to strike, you learn to move your body in a different way. And when you get into the contact sparring, it's like you get into how to move their body in a way to set up something. And your world just gets bigger with that training, especially in the early part. The trouble is that as you stay in one thing with training, then you quit seeing everything outside their little box. And that's why grapplers get surprised when someone bites them. They forgot that that's part of it. It's not, they knew it. They need to be reminded. Usually they're bit before they get reminded. And so that's technique-based training, like you were talking about. When you try to memorize stuff, it's in the wrong part of your brain to use in a fight. Right. So you have to reject that. And that's why I like the play-based, because it focuses on gifts. It's not what can I manufacture here? What can I make happen? But is this guy giving me something already? You can't hit without an opening. So the person gives you that gift. My experience with locks is they're actually really easy to use in a real fight, but they're hard to make. It's just that there's no way someone can have an arm straight or straighten their arm without giving you their elbow. And there's no way they can pull back without giving you the shoulder. But I have to recognize what that looks like and what I can reach it with. So that play-based and centering around what is the gift. This guy is helping me defeat himself. How is he doing it? How can I see that? Is really powerful and gets people good much faster.
Yeah, and there's no pressure on them to think they have to do something right. I'll see, like one of my big pet peeves is they'll learn a new either lock, or they'll learn a new, say, joint break. Yeah. And they'll be in the middle of what you call play, we're doing, which is a great term. And they'll do the most ridiculous. They'll force that move. They'll force that thing in a situation where it's like, why would you ever do that? Particularly I'll see guys like you laid them out on the ground. You're standing right over them. Myriad of ways to end the situation, and they'll literally go down to one knee, grab a wrist, and do a wrist break on it. And why? Because they think, oh, I just learned that. I got to use it right now. And when you can break people of those patterns and they get into the thing, like, what did this individual give you, and what's available to you, exactly. and quit trying to do techniques on people. Yeah. That's getting through to people, but I understand why, I understand why they think that way. But breaking that pattern is really huge. And I love how you put that. And also the humility you always have to keep in the back of your mind that, hey, listen, an untrained person, they probably have an advantage on me if I don't understand that they have ability, that they have that primal ability that's going to just come out of them at that point.
One of the few times I've been successfully sucker punched was by an 80-year-old schizophrenic lady. Wow. There were no tells. I don't think she knew she was going to do it. It was just bam. And then she just went back to talking her word salad. She had no sign that she was going to do it, no sign that she had done it. It was just
That's actually an interesting point, Rory. What have you found training training women and how women look at using violence? The challenge, what are the challenges and what are the unexpected, um, I guess, unexpected advantages that they have?
They have a lot. Um, the biggest challenge, I think, as an instructor, or rephrase, as a male instructor who's been a martial artist for a long time, is getting women to trust that you aren't going to teach them bullshit. Most martial arts self-instructors are men. They're athletic men. They've been martial artists for a long time, and they tend to take their experience and think it's the experience. So there's a whole bunch of self-defense training that's about how to win a bar fight.
Right.
What if you spill somebody's beer and they aren't taking an apology? Women don't have to worry about that. When you take into the context, so the first thing you're first talking about the challenges is building rapport. And I start with frequently, look, I know nothing about being a 5'2" woman. I know a lot about criminals. I'm going to teach you everything I can about that. I know a lot about body mechanics, teach you everything I can about that. And together we'll work on the solutions you need for the problems you think you're going to face. Are we good with that? So, and that's part of that pushing the power down. I'm helping them decide what they need and then develop it. So so women, for advantages, they tend to have a way more realistic view of violence than most guys. Most guys watch too much TV. They fantasize way too much. And so they assume that they're going to be attacked by 8 people in a gang and they're going to handle it just fine without getting injured at all, and then walk away with the girl into the sunset afterwards. And that's pretty much as far as they've thought it through. Women are used to being outmatched in size and strength. One of my friends who teaches self-defense, when she gets someone, especially someone coming from a sports martial arts background who's trying to teach self-defense, is like, so imagine that my normal opponent is twice my size and 3 times my strength. What do you got for that? Because there's nothing that works within your weight class that's going to help her. She needs to think an entirely different way. So 1, women are way more realistic about that. 2, one of the things that's really hard for guys to get is the difference between hunting and fighting. They think that they're scales of the same thing. Women get almost immediately they aren't. You are not going to be able to fight me, but you can assassinate me. So we're going to be working on assassination skills, things that, and we know human bodies have certain weaknesses. We know what they are. So those are what we're going to concentrate on. And I don't want you trying to set up for it or fight for it. Play scared.
Yeah.
Beg, whatever to do. So he opens up that throat or the ear or whatever you have on your A target list. And then we set this up and then strike it with everything you've got. Because if you half-ass it, and almost everyone half-asses it the first time, if you half-ass it, he's going to punish you. Yeah. So, and if I said that to a guy, they'd be come up with all these reasons why this isn't true in their case.
Yeah.
Women already know it's true, and having a guy talk about it realistically and then talk about, and this is not about fighting, this is about hurting people. Fighting is hard. Breaking people is easy. So that's the mindset you need to be in. It is about breaking people.
Yeah. So that's the perfect place to end. Now, listen, if you're watching this to this part, you just heard that last part. To me, that's absolutely key, what he just closed with, the idea of hunting versus fighting. I've said it differently in the past, but again, I love how Rory couches a lot of this. Yes. Are some of the principles that I teach very consistent with his? Yes, absolutely. But that's not why I have him on. I want you to hear somebody that can talk from a very different experience. Remember, he's 5'8". He's never had the luxury of the physical presence. I'm somebody that has physical presence, and I'm 6'2". I'm regularly about 240, 245, worked out for years. So I have the presence that, helps me in a lot of ways. Helps me against all the people I don't care about, but helps me. Whereas Rory's never had that. He's had to be able to go in. He's stocky. He's definitely very competent, but, being 5'8" and going into the prison system and being a sergeant, that means you have to be competent at putting hands on people and very realistic about that. And that's why I think this discussion is so important. So now part 3, we get into more of the uncomfortable truths of this. And again, the idea is if you're uncomfortable with some of this, and if some of this is sitting here going, gee, you're just throwing hope to the wind, that's not the idea. It's if we embrace this and we understand that here's how things are, and this is the reality of physical violence, now we got something to work with. So that's the whole point of doing this. It's not to be doomsayers. It's not to say there's no hope. It's to be very realistic about what our training goals are when it comes to our self-protection against imminent, grievous bodily harm. Remember the assumptions I always make. You can have multiple attackers. Those attackers are going to be bigger, faster, and stronger. Those attackers are going to be carrying weapons. That's the assumption. And if you have, principles like this and what Rory's talking about, you'll be much better prepared. And that's the whole idea behind this particular interview that I'm doing. So anyways, part 3 is coming up. Comments, subscribe, share this channel, share this interview with people. Let them know that it's here. That's how we grow. So thanks so much.